America's public enemy number one is drug abuse.
Drugs are menacing our society. They're threatening our values and undercutting our institutions. They're killing our children.
All of us agree that the gravest domestic threat facing our nation today is drugs.
That they are wrong if they think that drug use is not dangerous as well as illegal.
We intend to do what is necessary to end the drug menace and to eliminate this dark, evil enemy within.
This is the Dr. Junkie Show. I'm Ben Boyce. Today, I want to talk about free will and addiction, two subjects that are often still completely misunderstood in our world. And I want to make sure that as I talk about free will, I stick to the actual subject, that when I look for what I'm calling free will, it aligns with what people usually think of when they imagine free will. See, when we talk about free will in our world, we're not really talking about someone having a gun to their head, and we're not talking about someone making choices that fit with their general preferences in the world. I like chocolate, so I'll always choose chocolate. That's not what most people mean when they say we have free will, so let's look for what they do mean. When somebody says free will, they usually mean that someone had the ability to do something other than they did, that they could have actually made a different choice in the exact same situation. Now, they usually describe the reason our culture feels that it's good to punish somebody when they commit a crime because they could have done otherwise. And I like this definition that someone could have done otherwise if the world was rewound to the exact same situation, because it includes all the other pieces that we often think of when we talk about free will, like the ability to select from more than one option, the ability to not be unduly manipulated or brainwashed, the ability to choose something without someone else knowing what I'll choose before I know what I'll choose. That certainly doesn't feel like free will. These are all included in the thought experiment of just rewinding the universe to the exact same state and then somehow choosing differently than you chose. And don't forget that when we rewind the universe, we rewind everything. The experiences that person might have had since this choice, they're gone. And the person's once again in the exact same state of mind as they were last time they made this choice, with the exact same tools at their disposal. Free will says this time they can choose differently. And it doesn't say they can choose differently because of some random or unidentifiable reason. We can't say that if I chose red on the roulette wheel last time, and then we rewind the universe and I chose green this time, but no one knows why, because people don't mean randomness when they say free will. They mean very much the opposite. So this type of free will, the type most people mean when they throw that term around, I'm here to tell you that it's not possible. I absolutely could not have selected green in my rewound universe if I'd selected red in the exact same situation, because it would literally be the same situation. I'll dig a little deeper into why during this episode, but since this show is about drugs and addiction, I want to plant that seed at the start of this as well, because that's where I'm actually headed. I mean, sure, our misunderstanding of free will also applies to crime and punishment, spanking kids, disciplining in school, training programs for law enforcement, treatment of mental illness, religion, all of it. But my focus today is mainly on how it applies to our cultural understanding of addiction. One of the retorts along this line that I'll get to free will rants goes a lot like, Ben, you're an addicted person. How on earth can you tell people who are struggling with addiction that they don't have free will and then expect them to even get better? It's a silly question, but the people who ask me don't realize it's silly because ideology changes the way people think. And in the United States, our ideology includes attitudes towards addiction, vice, and choice, free will. Attitudes that must conform to the capitalist norms of the day. If you wake up tomorrow and you just don't want to go to work, your boss can't exactly view that as you just rolling with your biology or just following the universe. Your boss has to act as if free will exists and that you're choosing to skip work because our entire society is based on him acting that way. If a judge is deciding a case where someone punched somebody else, they can't start trying to understand what would make the puncher into the sort of person who would just punch someone in that situation, because that's not really how our legal system works. The judge and the jury's job is to evaluate the crime, assume free will exists, and then punish the offender based on an arbitrary guidebook. But that question the judge could have asked, it undergirds every decision we make. It's the central hub of this episode. What would make someone into the sort of person who would make that decision in that situation? And the answer is always the same. It's what happened before. As I've said repeatedly on this show, I not only think free will is an illusion, but I think the illusion of free will is an illusion. Or maybe a better way to say that is it's a legend. It's a story we've all heard so many times without any challenges that we just live our lives as if it's true without really ever bothering to check. But if you pay close attention to any choice you make, you'll realize that you can't spot anywhere in that decision-making process where you had a list of every option available in front of you and you chose from that list without any influence from the world around you, from your biology, from experiences that you've had in the past, from your values. The next choice I make is always the sum total of my life experience, including my genetics, up to that point. There is no special part of me that doesn't know about my experiences, my values, my beliefs, and my goals. There's no spirit man driving the car from on high who doesn't know or care about my 10-year plan or my son's birthday party this weekend, which I want to attend, or my commitments to God or to some organization. Even if you do believe in a soul, you almost certainly don't believe that soul is completely unaware of who you are and the things that you care about. You probably believe exactly the opposite. Our decisions, when made of sound mind at least, are always based on who we are and what has happened to us in the past, and what's happened to our grandparents and their grandparents, and so on. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself with that last part, so let's slow down and take this from the start. How can showing someone who's struggling with addiction that free will isn't real help them with their addiction? Losing the illusion of free will forces you to rethink every quick answer you have in life, and a lot of those quick answers are packed with shame and stigma, if not outright falsehoods. I used to think that I was an addicted person because I chose sinful things where my friends didn't, or because I was selfish when they exercised self-control, or because they were strong enough to resist temptation while I was weak and gave in. There's not a whole lot of room for growth if your issue is, I'm just too weak and selfish, I guess I'll try harder next time. But as I'll walk through today, that's not how it feels from inside the body if you pay attention while the decision is being made. That's not how decision-making works. It is, though, a great way for everyone around you to avoid feeling any responsibility when you struggle with addiction or when someone is convicted of a crime. It couldn't have had anything to do with me. It was their free choice that made this happen. The belief in free will kept me chained to the shame of being a weak-minded junkie who just freely chose my own fate. That's not the case at all. Losing the illusion of free will let me see my life as just a life, as a series of unfolding events positioned in space-time that, when fully explored, always explains what happens next. Why did I accept Jesus into my heart when I was 10? Because of an experience I had 5 minutes before that, in a church where a pastor was using guilt and fear to trick kids into accepting Jesus into their hearts, even though none of us even knew what that meant. And why was I at church? Well, because before that, my mom had decided to go. Why had my mom decided to go? Because earlier in her life, her parents had raised her to believe a particular denominational belief that aligned well with that church, and because 10 years back, we'd moved to a house located in an area that was kind of close to that church. And why was my mom raised in that Christian home? And why did my parents buy that house in that community? Because of the things that happened 1 second, 1 year, 1 decade, 1 millennium before. This simple recipe for evaluating why you just did whatever it is that you just did, it works for everything. why you ate what you did this morning, why you took the route to work you did today, why you have the job you have, why you spend your money on the things you spend your money on, and why you're just about ready to turn this podcast off because it's kind of starting to make you uncomfortable. It almost sounds like this guy's really thought about this a lot. All of those impulses and the decisions they instigate, they're the result of your past and nothing else. And realizing that opens the door to rethinking methods for getting better, for improving your life. It allows addicted people to recognize our lack of agency in this world and to notice all of the ways our environment works to make our addictions grow while incentivizing us to keep them hidden. And it gives us a way to rethink treatment. I mean, if the decision I make tomorrow is based on what happens before that decision, well, then I can sandbag the process and work to put myself in a mental space where my answer tomorrow will be the answer I'd like to select in whatever situation I'm thinking about. If, for example, I find myself struggling to stay off heroin every day at 1 p.m., I get a heck of a hankering just after lunch, then I can plan to include something in my day that makes me feel excited, engaged, content, right around 1 p.m. I can actually make my upcoming decision different than it would otherwise be by changing what happened before I made that decision. Every decision, every choice we make is the result of what happened before. But aha, you might be thinking, I just spotted free will in your description, Dr. Boyce. You said I can choose today to do things knowing that doing those things will make me more likely to act in line with my stated morals and values tomorrow. Isn't that free will? Gotcha. To find out if it's free will, and it's not, but let's check anyway, we just need to zoom all the way in on this new choice we just discovered. The choice to try to ensure that I act in accordance with my stated values tomorrow around 1 p.m. Why did I make it when I did? And despite it seeming like I just made it freely out of the blue, poof, we all actually know better. I also made that choice because of things that happened before. Maybe I'd recently had someone say they don't like me nodding out at 2 p.m., and maybe their words compelled me to change. But then, wait, why did their words make me want to change? I can't choose whether I give two shits about how someone feels about me. When the stranger on the freeway flips me off on the way to work, I hardly remember him an hour later. I don't care. So if these particular people telling me whatever it was that they told me made me want to change, to do things to enact that change, well, I can't help that that's the reaction I had. It just happened. And it happened because of things that happened before. Conversations I've had with these particular people that made me value their friendship, or life experiences where I learned from parents and authority figures that people like them are to be respected. There's no room for free will in this story. Their words either bother me and make me want to change, or they don't. I can't choose for something to bother me that doesn't, any more than I can choose to not be bothered by something that's bothering the shit out of me. It just happens. It either compels me to change, or it doesn't. There's no free will required here. What I'm getting at, if we just want to cut through the fluff and hit bedrock, is your values. When you consider any choice, you basically weigh the pros and cons of that choice, and if the pros outweigh the cons, or if you can at least figure out some way to tell yourself they do in the moment, heroin is pretty fabulous for the next couple hours at least, well then you choose to do the thing. But here's the thing. Different people have very different values. Values that come from, here we go again, experiences they've had in the past and nowhere else. So when I think about replacing my breakfast fruit bowl with 3 pounds of bacon, my choice-making circuits start thinking about my cholesterol. Why do I care about my cholesterol? I just do, and I can't not. And I start thinking about how tired I'll be in 3 hours if I just pound bacon instead of fruit for breakfast. Why do I care about that? I just do, and I can't not. And I start thinking about how bacon isn't quite as delicious and fulfilling to me as it seems to be to a lot of other people. Lucky me, I have less of a temptation in that regard than others. Why? Because I just do, and it couldn't be otherwise. So I come to the conclusion, I'll just stick with my fruit bowl today. As much as I'd love to pat myself on the back for that awesome choice, I gotta admit, it actually just happened. I didn't do it, I witnessed it from inside my head. But if you had the same choice before you would make a completely different choice based on your completely different background and values, the things that have happened to you before right now. You might still choose to not have the bacon, but chances are you'd have different weights on different arguments for or against. Maybe you're religious and you think God would be angry if you ate pork, or maybe you're a vegan and the idea of bacon disgusts you on a moral level. You can't just choose to feel otherwise, or to make the same choice yet weigh your values differently. And even if you could, you still wouldn't have free will because you'd find yourself unmoored from any sort of consistent standard if that's how it actually worked. You'd be closer to randomness than free will if you found yourself making weird decisions for reasons you couldn't put your thumb on. And that's why I said at the start of this that I not only see free will as an illusion, but the illusion is an illusion. There is no illusion if you pay close attention. You never see a space in the decision-making process where you really feel as if you made a choice that's unrelated to who you are and what you represent. It actually feels like just the opposite, because it is. It feels like every choice I make is intimately caught up with who I am at this point in my life, what I've become today based on all the things I've been through so far. I can't wake up tomorrow and decide to freely believe Islam is true and to make my decisions for that day based on that belief. I can wake up and decide to lie and say I believe it is, but then we're back to zooming in on that choice to lie and figuring out why I made it. Maybe free will's there. Why didn't I value, say, the truth is more important and then I refused to lie? Or why didn't I fear the Christian God's wrath so much that I didn't dare pretend to believe Islam? I just didn't, and I couldn't have done differently. My past experience informs my decision. And you can't back the camera off farther and take a wide-angle shot here to solve this problem. You can't say, okay, maybe in the moment you don't make fully free choices, but you can decide ahead of time to work on yourself and become more moral, right? You can choose to put yourself in a better position in the future. Well, yeah, but how would you make that choice? Let's zoom in again. You'd have this thought pop into your head before you had any chance to freely think any of it. You can't choose what thought pops into your head next. It'd already be there if you could, so you're already lucky when a thought like this shows up. Hurrah! I should work on being more moral. And then you'd enter the weighing value stage of decision making. And all of your past experiences would come to bear on whether or not you really want to work on being more moral and on what you even think the idea of more moral is. Does it mean making a fuck ton of money to give to the poor? Or does it mean visiting your granny once a week to bring her chicken soup? And of course, if you think you're already moral and you don't need any work, even if you're wrong, well then it'll be impossible for you to even make the choice to work on being more moral. And if you think you could use some work, but you also value video game time and, prank calling the old folks home up the street, well, then those values might well outweigh the long-term goal of being more moral, and you'll choose to skip the project. Granny gets no soup. You can't get away from making decisions this way. How else would you make them? Randomness? Throw dice? If you pay attention while you make these sorts of decisions, you can actually recognize these values being weighed and adjusting your choice in real time. No free will required. Think about this. If I gave you a newborn baby today and told you that I was going to destroy the entire planet if you didn't figure out a way to turn that innocent baby into a compulsive thief by the time they're 14, do you think you could do it? Would you at least give it a shot? Of course, you'd first have to decide whether or not you believe me about my ability to destroy the Earth, and decide whatever you decide without the ability to freely change your view of that evidence. And if you think I can destroy the Earth, that I'm Elon Musk with rockets, and of course, if you think the Earth is even worth saving, yet another decision based on values from your past which you can't control, then I'm guessing you can already think of some really good, awful? Some really weird ways to morally corrupt a kid. maybe you could withhold love unless they stole, or maybe you could starve them as a kid and make them steal to eat. Or maybe you could come up with a religious story in which they're commanded to steal on threat of eternal damnation. Maybe you just tell them some maniac's going to blow up the planet if they don't get really good at stealing. Each of these choices would reflect your values. And this actually happens to a lot of kids. There's no shortage of 14-year-old shoplifters. Been there. And all of those kids are blamed for their behavior, even though they, like the rest of us, like the baby I just gave you, have no free will. They're products of the experiences they've had and the values those experiences have created within them. They're no different than the hypothetical kid you raised to be a thief. If a person is thrilled by the idea of shoplifting, unconcerned about consequences, and convinced that it's ethical to boot, how could you ever get them to freely choose not to do it anyway? You'd have to change their values. Now, when this 14-year-old saves the planet by stealing a PlayStation from Walmart on their 14th birthday, is it okay for us to punish them? Did they have a free choice? They would almost certainly feel like they made a free choice, the same way we all feel like we do all the time. But does that change the fact that you stole their free choice by raising them in a way that prevented them from making any other decision in the moment? That you stole their free choice by giving them experiences beforehand that ensured they would choose the way they did, and that they would feel as if they'd freely done so? I don't think we can punish this kid. Now, what about genetics? Which is maybe where I should have started. Although, if you're looking for free will there because it's the only place left I haven't already blown up, you're definitely looking in the wrong place. Our genetics are both the result of things that happened before, who had sex with who, how these people were living, what they were eating, stuff like that, and a blueprint for how different portions of our brain and body will develop. Will you have an extra large happiness center of your brain, or will you be unlucky and wind up not having enough of the neurons that downregulate the brain's anger centers? Are you responsible for how your brain turns out? Of course, as always, I'm simplifying the hell out of neurology because it's not my area of expertise, so apologies to the brain geeks. But our genes literally shape us in ways that we can't be unshaped. Ways that make your decisions different than mine, sometimes even if we've had the exact same experiences up to that point. I mean, think about how this works on the basic level of neurology, to say nothing of all the other basic biology we could dive into here. There's 100 billion neurons in your brain making you feel like you, storing your values and experiences, bringing them to bear on current decisions, giving you dreams about the past. Each of these neurons specializes in a neurotransmitter, dopamine, serotonin, GABA, whatever. And each type of neurotransmitter does something different than the others by lowering or raising voltage in a specific network of neurons, by firing up or shutting down a particular part of your brain, those simplified happiness and anger networks. Now think about how easy it is for genetics to completely shape someone's life before they're even born by, say, limiting the number of dopamine neurons or by overstating them. More simplification here, but say I have something like 10,000 neural chains running from dopaminergic regions of my brain, but you only have 7,000. That's certain to affect your experiences related to dopamine, so you might find it harder to get pumped up for an assignment or to find certain activities enjoyable, while I have a much easier time getting some dopamine action going and just being content staring at the wall. Lucky me. When it comes to finding ourselves making a decision about whether or not to use a drug that increases dopamine, say cocaine, you and I are going to be making two very different decisions. I might be making that choice feeling great about life and content in my skin, whereas you might be feeling like nothing matters and life is awful. Give me the dope. We'd be facing two very different things looking at the same line of blow. And our choices would have been made not in that moment, but in large part before we were even born, when our genes started to activate and construct our phenotypes. Even if you steel man this example and assume that we're both trying yet struggling to say no to the line, say for legal or health reasons, maybe we're trying to avoid Coke right now, but our biology and mentality really make us want to do it. And let's say we both have the same number of dopamine neurons. Lucky us, it's still not the same choice. If I dig down deep looking for self-control and I find it, but you dig down deep and come up empty-handed, how on earth is that free will? It's luck, the kind that reminds us that those who accomplish big things in this world are also not responsible for their PhDs in Mars rockets. The good guys are just as constructed by the past as the bad guys. Dopamine's a good neurotransmitter to use for this thought experiment, although all of the neurotransmitters would work for it, because dopamine has to do with motivation, with intent, with time to go. It's the neurotransmitter that guides our movements, that instigates activity, that tells us when something is important and we should really pay attention to it right now. And when dopamine's out of whack, things can get bad fast. Schizophrenia, for example, again with the supersimplification, schizophrenia is a disorder where parts of the brain get way too much dopamine action, and when that dopamine shows up, it typically signals something is happening that's worth paying special attention to, even if nothing is. It says, it's time to act, tune in, engage. We all have thousands of really odd thoughts pop into our heads every day, many of them so weird or out of character that we hardly notice them. We see the subway pass close to a pedestrian, and for just a second, we imagine it hitting them and popping their head off. Yikes, where did that shit come from? And then we dismiss that thought as unimportant, and we go back to what we were doing. With schizophrenia, those thoughts sometimes coincide with a dopamine boost, which tells the brain, wrongly, that whatever just happened is very important. Pay close attention to it. This is why people with schizophrenia can hear voices that aren't there or have hallucinations. Dopamine marks their normal throwaway thoughts as important, or even as coming from outside their brain. People sometimes say they think God or a voice is talking to them. Parkinson's, on the other hand, is a disorder of not having enough dopamine in particular parts of the brain. And you can see how dopamine works in the way Parkinson's patients struggle to initiate and sustain controlled movements and thoughts. When they try to move their arm, low dopamine starts and stops the action over and over. It makes them look like they're shaking because dopamine is vital to motivation in movement. But neither of these conditions make us think that person should just do better. I mean, they have free will, take control and use it. For some reason, though, other dopamine-related conditions do. And it's not just dopamine neurons like I used in the earlier example. Even if we have the same amount, your dopamine neurons might have less receptor sites on them, less doorways for dopamine to bind to and act on those neurons. So we have the same amount of dopamine neurons and the same level of dopamine, but mine work better. Or maybe your dopamine neurons are dealing with a situation where there's less dopamine floating around generally, even though there's plenty of receptor sites. Maybe your dopamine production sites produce slightly less dopamine than normal. So unlike the guy next to you on the factory line, your neurons are always starving for dopamine while his appear to have plenty. You want to light the building on fire and quit all day long, while he seems mostly content at his station. There are plenty of ways to see that when two people are making a supposedly free choice about, say, blowing a line of cocaine, they're not making the same choice. I've left experience completely out of this scenario, and it's still obvious that they're dealing with different problems. And their different values, their different experiences. Maybe one of them did see their parents use cocaine all the time, so they have no moral compulsions about it, while the other was raised believing that cocaine is the devil's powdered sugar. It's hard to even imagine where free will could fit into a story like this. You are your experiences. Your choices are the result of your values. This is one of the reasons I'm so hard on religion, because it forces people to update their values without realizing it, so they don't realize they discard the value of truth and consistent morality. When you control somebody's values, you control their will. You control their choices. Our criminal justice system is built on the notion that we're all freely acting agents. It pretends not only that we all start off life with a universal set of values, morals, skills, and experiences, but also that we all have the same biological level of happy and sad, content and anxious, fulfilled and angsty. We don't. Imagine a criminal justice system, although that name wouldn't make any sense, but we can fix that. Imagine if it focused on the truth of the human condition, that our experiences shape our values, and our values chart our path through life. We'd find ourselves immediately reorienting from a system that waits until awful shit happens and then locks away the perpetrator in a hole, to a system that attempts to prevent those bad things from happening in the first place. If, as we all kind of already know, the reason kids steal from the store is because they haven't yet established the correct set of values and life goals, if we fuck around and admit that to ourselves, well, then we'll have to treat those kids like they need to be reconnected with their culture in a way that makes them value not stealing from it. We prevent crime and encourage community instead of punishing crime and ensuring alienation and trauma. Imagine that. Jettisoning the shitty concept of free will doesn't let people off the hook for bad behavior or make society less safe. I mean, a car doesn't have free will, but if it's a danger to people, if, say, the tires can't be secured and they keep falling off, well, then we lock it up. We take it off the road, but not as punishment. We don't go into the garage every day and yell at the car, kick it, tell it how awful it is. We lock it up until, and only until, we can ensure that the tires don't come off and hurt somebody. Or, better yet, we just make sure most cars don't wind up having tires that fall off in the first place. Punishment is silly if free will isn't real, but prevention is more important than ever, and it's actually easier to accomplish with this model. Okay, I want a beer, so it's time to wrap this up. Could I choose to not have a beer? Sure, but only through a decision-making process wherein some value that isn't currently weighing on my choice shows up to outweigh my yes with a no. And since that's not happening, I'll talk to you next time. I'm Ben Boyce.
Do not try and bend the spoon. That's impossible. Instead, only try to realize the truth.
What truth?
There is no spoon.